Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello again, and thanks for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. On the satellite, we've got here over the southeast coast, disturbance passing off to the southeast. So showers diminishing from northwest to southeast throughout the day today. Still hanging on down here to the south, but clearing out with some sunshine up to the north. Lots of sunshine from the Gulf of Alaska in across the interior, right up toward the Brooks Range and back out to the west. And then we have this big system here with a huge cloud shield spreading some cirrus in across the southwest coast, coming in over the top of the lower stuff here this afternoon that was gradually burning back toward the coastline. And that kind of held temperatures down in that area this afternoon, what they otherwise would have been. Otherwise, we're looking at sunshine, temperatures rising 60 to 70 here, especially south of the Alaska Range on down in toward Bristol Bay. Front draped across the north slope there, coming south of the Arctic coast, and there was some rain, anywhere from 1 to 2 tenths of an inch falling up in that area. And this system here bringing these strong winds, gale force or gale warnings, and the moderate and heavy amounts of rain to the area today, and that's all moving northeastward and gradually off to the east as another low center right in this area develops and pulls up the coastline, and the main low center hang back to the south. Anyway, for today, northeast winds gusting 40 to 60 miles per hour occurring out over the central Aleutians, and southeast winds at 40 to 60 miles an hour in gusts here from Unalaska Island into the western Alaska Peninsula, Cold Bay. Gusts to 40 miles an hour now up to St. George Island, and rainfall spreading eastward. Pretty heavy rain with this system. Unalaska picked up 1.5 inches with it, and 2.5 inches fell in the rain bucket out there at Adak. So quite a wet system here, both a pretty good wind and rain producer. Otherwise high pressure, light winds, not much of a gradient here across Alaska. Still low gusty on the north winds, Resurrection Bay and Seward earlier today, but those dropped off by early afternoon, and high pressure building into the northern panhandle. The shower activity here shifting off to the southeast, but some areas today picked up about ½ inch of rain down there, and but that's all ending. And the front up here had some light rain, mostly just light scattered rain back toward the Noatak Valley. Clouds on the increase in the westerly flow there across Kotzebue Sound into the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound. And there was another pretty widespread area of low clouds over the southwest interior, both the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta this morning. And for tonight, rain and wind will push up to the northeast there. It looks like gale warnings coming up the Alaska Peninsula, approaching Kodiak Island through Bristol Bay, and rain spreading into the southern Kuskokwim Valley back to probably right around Hooper Bay or to the south there by late tonight, early tomorrow morning. Also could see some rain trying to push in to southern Cook Inlet late tonight, but definitely rain rolling into the Kodiak Island area. Clouds on the increase to the north, fair here over the eastern interior, and expecting temperatures to drop into the mid-20s in some areas through the clear areas here, and clearing skies down across the southeast coast. Not much gradient at all here, so look for some possibility of some low clouds and fog forming later tonight into tomorrow morning. Otherwise, this front weakening now beginning to wash out there right near and along the Brooks Range. So it could be some light amounts of mixed precipitation up there. Otherwise, areas of fog along the eastern Arctic coast, also from the Chukchi Sea down towards St. Lawrence Island. Could be a little fog as well. And then we'll look at the tomorrow's forecast. Big change here for southern Alaska with the gradient. Pretty tight now, where the lines are closest together on these maps. That's where the winds blow the strongest, and you can see you got quite a few lines across here now. So there's a high wind watch out for East Anchorage beginning tomorrow afternoon through tomorrow night. For East Anchorage and the Chugach Mountains, possible gusts 70 to 90 miles per hour. There for the higher elevations like Bear Valley and those areas, Malley Ridge, and moderate to heavy rain also pushing up. Heaviest, of course, on the southern Kenai Peninsula, eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, that trailing right down across Kodiak Island with areas of rain becoming more showery back toward the coastline, but pretty widespread showers here for Bristol Bay across the deltas, some moisture up there into Norton Sound, and then the old low center down in this area keeps a pretty good chance of rain in over the eastern Aleutians to about the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit of a breakthrough here, and showers from the Pribilofs down into mostly Atka. Diminishing winds here, higher pressure building in from Adak on out to the west. Up to the north, just leftover clouds now and maybe a little bit of moisture along the north slope. That area dissipating, so conditions will be improving along the Brooks Range during the morning, tomorrow morning. Good VFR and some sunshine again through the central interior, but a lot of mid and high level clouds will be streaming northeastward across the area there. And generally it will be a dry day here for the Panhandle with varying amounts of sun depending on where you are. And looking ahead to the first work day of the week here for Monday, this front pushes eastward, and there's a narrow band of some pretty heavy precipitation associated with it right up into the Yakutat area. But again, the whole pattern gradually shifting eastward. Rain spreads over the northern southeast coast while the southern areas stay dry. And then that breaks out to showers here behind the front, and then another trough, an upper level trough, pulling in from the northwest and is going to start swinging eastward. Looks like a pretty good areas of moderate rainfall, at least with that, from the Kuskokwim Valley coming right into the Alaska Range on down to the northeast Bristol Bay area. So pretty showery for Kodiak. Rain areas, or continuous rain up here over the northwest with that 990 millibar low center there. Very gusty winds here. Northeast, possibly gusting 30 to 40 miles an hour, a few higher gusts there. Western Arctic coast coming back around through the Bering Strait. And the western Seward Peninsula, lighter winds now for the Bering Sea, kind of an area of high pressure right through here with just mostly cloudy skies. And up to the north, that front right up to the eastern Brooks Range. So look for some pretty good rainfall amounts on the southern slopes there of the central and eastern mountains. And there's also a wind advisory out for, I think it kicks in late tomorrow night and continues through Monday here for the passes of the eastern Alaska Range west of the toe cutoff. They're expecting south to southeast winds 40 to 60 miles an hour, again late tomorrow night, and that continuing through Monday. Out to the west, the next front here pushing more wind and rain into the western Aleutians, approaching Adak. Look for the increase in the winds with rain moving into the area out there late in the afternoon. For this afternoon, temperatures across the Panhandle, not too bad, mid to upper 50s for the most part, Skagway up to 51. Yakutat 61, same at Skagway. Valdez, warm spot in the state that I noticed when I looked at the temperature at 3 o'clock, 68 degrees, 67 at Big Lake, Willow, and also at Seward. Up in the Copper River Basin, not bad there, right around 60 in the mid-afternoon with Northway at 60 also, or that's Tok with 60, upper 50s back across the central Tanana Valley down into McGrath. And then for the upper Yukon Valley areas, Fort Yukon at 57, 54 at Arctic Village, down to 48 at Anatuvik, and mostly in the 30s there for the Arctic coast, North Slope areas. We had Airfield up to 42. Wainwright just 33 degrees this afternoon with a light northwest breeze there, and then back into the 40s off to the southwest. Kivalina, Point Hope, Kotzebue up to 49, Deering 55. Nome 46, about the same there at Wales and at Savunga, with 50s here. Again, the lower cloud deck hanging in, and then the higher clouds coming in really kind of put the brakes on the temperatures rising this afternoon. So just upper 40s to lower 50s out over the deltas, lower 50s to the Pribilofs, 50s out here over the Aleutians, Unalaska up to 61 though, and mid to upper 50s for the peninsula, getting well into the upper 60s there up over northeast Bristol Bay. And for tonight, lows 25 to 33 here, Copper River Basin, up to the eastern Arctic coast, then back to the west, 30s, 40s to mid 50s for the Alaska Peninsula. Highs tomorrow, pretty nice here, 60 to 65 or better there in the northeast Bristol Bay, back along the peninsula. 50s, central interior, upper 40s to mid 50s, southern Alaska, about the same as today for the Panhandle. And for flying weather, we've got IFR, remnants of that old frontal boundary lying up there along the Brooks Range. IFR also along the eastern Arctic coast, coming into southern Kodiak Island and the southern coast of the Alaska Peninsula, with IFR from the central Aleutians right up into Togiak Bay. Marginal VFR here in the Gulf of Alaska. We'll see for tomorrow that pushes eastward in toward the northern Panhandle, right along the coast, so probably Elfin Cove, maybe Sitka. IFR sliding up into west, or mainly across, well, western Prince William Sound. That'll be the lowest areas, but they painted the whole sound there with IFR, and also along the Alaska Range up into here, VFR to the north and to the east, and then marginal VFR north of the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast. Areas of IFR, Pribilofs, and then the southern coast of the Alaska Peninsula. For passes, Anaktuvuk, marginal to start with, both Anaktuvuk and Adigan improving throughout the day to VFR, probably by mid-morning. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal becoming IFR, and for rainy, same forecast, coming down to IFR. Windy, VFR becoming marginal, especially on the southern entrance, but staying VFR into the Tanana Valley. Isabel, VFR becoming marginal. Forecasts are the same for Mentasta. Tanita, VFR coming right down to IFR conditions, and Portage coming down to IFR as well. Chilkoot and White will stay VFR. Freezing levels, 8,000 feet southern Alaska to 12,000 feet there, just up to southern Kodiak Island, and it cools back to 2,000 feet on the north slope. Icing, quite a bit here rolling into southern Alaska from southwest to northeast, sliding eastward here. Could be some areas of occasional widespread moderate here in some locations. Prince William Sound back to the west a little bit, and that gradually spreading northeastward tomorrow night and into Monday. And then for the winds aloft here, again, upper level low of that big storm tomorrow midday just west of the Alaska Peninsula, south to north flow at about 120 knots. Ridging through here, but again, the whole pattern gradually shifting eastward a little bit there. Northwesterlies at 100 through here, and 9,000 foot winds shaping up like this. Good, strong south to north flow, 35 to 55 knots right up into southern Alaska. Northerlies 20 to 40 back to the west in a narrower area. And lighter winds up here to the north, out to the Arctic coast. And for the Panhandle, same pattern at 3,000 feet, strong flow south to north right up into southern Alaska, 30 to 50 knots. Dropping back through here with less gradient. Narrow band northerlies 25 to 35 there from around Amonic all the way down to Atka. And then getting more lighter and variable up through here on out to the immediate Arctic coast. And as far as turbulence goes, occasional moderate chop, pretty likely anywhere below 8,000 feet, Kodiak Island, right up into south central Alaska to the western Alaska Range, and then also building and developing along the eastern Alaska Range as well. And then some more moderate chop, pretty likely with those gusty northeast winds continuing for the central Aleutians. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. In Alaska, terrain can vary greatly depending on where you're at. From mountainous terrain to low-lying valleys and channeled waterways, Alaska has some of the most extreme terrain features in the world. This has a direct influence on the wind patterns. Today in studio, I have Eric Stevens, who is the Science and Operations Officer at the Fairbanks Forecast Office, and he's going to explain to us the detail of terrain-influenced winds. Welcome back, Eric.
Glad to be here, Jim.
what is meant by terrain-influenced winds?
Well, wind blows because of pressure patterns, and you have broad-scale pressure patterns like high pressure, which should make winds blow in a clockwise direction, low pressure, which makes winds blow in a counterclockwise pressure. You have a couple of H's and L's on a map, so you ought to know what the winds are. But it turns out that that broad-scale pattern will be modified by local terrain. Mountains get in the way. They interrupt this idealized flow around high and low pressure. And the result is that you can have very different winds at specific locations, even though those locations might not be that far apart.
Well, we have a lot of mountains up here in Alaska, more than you can even count, I think. And with that, you must have a lot of terrain-influenced winds in these mountainous regions.
Right. I think there's more terrain-influenced wind in Alaska than not terrain-influenced wind. And this has all kinds of implications in Alaska. Mariners know this. In southeast Alaska, wind tends to blow up and down the channels, not necessarily according to high and low pressure systems in that idealized sense. Alaska Fire Service knows how during the day, even though the pressure pattern on a broad scale is kind of quiet, that winds will tend to blow up valley, up hillside during the afternoon, and then gently come down valley, down hillside in the evenings and overnight. And that's important for them to fight fires. They need to account for that. And people who live in Delta Junction and the Fort Greely area know all about terrain-influenced winds. That's some of the most prominent terrain-influenced winds in the interior.
And they have a jet called?
The Tanana Valley Jet.
All right.
That's a homemade name that we came up with at the Weather Service because we had to deal with this phenomenon so often that it just got a name so we could know what we're talking about more quickly.
So what is the Tanana Valley Jet?
Tanana Valley Jet comes up many times in winter, sometimes in the summertime. It's more common in the winter when there's high pressure in northwestern Canada, say centered over the Yukon Territory, and a low pressure system churning away out there in the Bering Sea. So that's your broad scale weather pattern. But because of the Alaska Range and because of the Yukon-Tanana uplands there and the Tanana River cutting right between those two, when you have high pressure in Canada like that, especially in the winter, if it's Arctic air, cold high pressure, instead of having the wind flow, we should think, from south to north because you have high pressure there and low pressure out west, you should have a south wind. Well, instead, the mountains interfere with that broad idealized flow, with the result being that the air pretty much blows straight from high pressure to low pressure, straight down that Tanana Valley along the river.
So Delta Junction, I mean, they're pretty windy all the time. It seems like it, for me, I mean, when I'm looking at Delta Junction, I mean, it seems like they've always got some sort of wind there, and they get this Tanana Valley Jet. Mm-hmm. Do they also get a Chinook wind? Because that's another wind that we get up here in Alaska. Very familiar with that here in Anchorage. Do they get a Chinook wind as well in Delta Junction?
In Delta, sometimes it can seem like if it's not windy out of one direction, it's windy out of the other one. Tanana Valley Jet is an east-southeast wind going down the river valley. Tends to be a colder wind. But another prominent wind there is that Chinook wind, which instead of going down the Tanana River, comes from the south, out of Isabel Pass in the Alaska Range. A totally different kind of mechanism. To get that Isabel Pass Chinook wind going, the ingredients you need there is a strong jet stream flow. The jet stream, that high altitude river of speedy air coming up from the south, maybe call it the Pineapple Express if it's coming all the way from those lower latitudes around Hawaii, shooting milder air straight north into the Alaska Range. Well, when that air hits the Alaska Range, the jet stream spraying in there, it's like a wall of terrain, the Alaska Range, but there's a couple of notches in the wall, including Isabel Pass. And the DOT put the highway through there because it was a nice convenient low spot. Well, Mother Nature can see that gap too, and so the wind gets concentrated through Isabel Pass, sprays through there, goes by Donnelly Dome, through Fort Greely and into Delta Junction there. That's the Chinook.
And that's Chinook is a warm wind, so it warms temperatures up too as well in Delta Junction, right?
That's an important difference between the Chinook wind and that Tanana Valley Jet. The Tanana Valley Jet tends to be a colder wind. In the wintertime, the Chinook can bring temperatures even above freezing up here in interior Alaska, which can be shocking. Even in January, if a good Chinook turns on, it can be above freezing. What's really interesting is when those two wind regimes are almost of equal prominence and they can kind of fight. And in Delta Junction, you can have the Tanana Valley Jet being prominent with that east-southeast wind down the river valley, colder wind, temperatures might be 0 and windy or 10 above, kind of on the cold side. And then the wind can snap around to be out of the south and the Chinook turns on and temperatures get up to freezing or even above freezing. But then a couple of hours later, maybe the Tanana Valley Jet turns on again. there are very subtle differences in which of those wind patterns will be active, and that's a real forecast issue.
Yeah, that must be hard to forecast for that. How do you write a forecast to sort of, follow those sort of wind patterns and temperature differences throughout the day? That's a tough deal for
a
forecasters.
meteorologist hopes to find one of the patterns being the predominant one, and you think, well, that one should win out. But it's those cases where each one is equally strong, like having two equally matched prize fighters in the ring, and you can't really tell which one's going to come up with. It's such a close fight. That is a tough one. It's safe to say it'll be windy.
Yes, very windy. You're in Fairbanks. That's where the forecast office is. Delta Junction, to the east. Is there differences there when these kind of wind patterns are going on, or is Fairbanks experiencing that Tanana Valley jet or the Chinook wind? What's going on with the two cities?
That's a very reasonable question, because Tanana Valley jet, well, Fairbanks is near the Tanana River. Fairbanks is north of the Alaska Range. Chinooks, Tanana Valley jets should affect Fairbanks as well. And Fairbanks can get windy, but it's not like Delta. We find that even though they are on the broad scale at first glance similar, that Delta is closer to the Alaska Range, it's closer to the opening of the mouth of the Tanana River there, and they're more exposed to those winds. You learn this the hard way by having to forecast it and see what happens. And the fact is that even though by Alaska standards, Fairbanks and Delta are pretty close to each other, about 100 miles apart. In Alaska, that's not much. Both interior, got some mountains around there. You'd think they'd be similar. But Fairbanks in the wintertime especially, turns out hardly ever very windy. Fairbanks is trapped under that temperature inversion, very quiet air, where Delta, it's not windy every day in Delta, but they're windy many days in the wintertime. The overall lesson here is, even though we have broad weather systems that affect entire parts of the state, because of the terrain modifying that broad circulation, you get very particular results at just one location as opposed to another one. Even though they're pretty close to each other, that's terrain-influenced winds. And that's what we call a microclimate too. A microclimate is the result of local terrain modifying the impact of broad-scale weather systems. Alaska has a lot of terrain, and Alaska has a lot of microclimates.
Well, thank you for coming in today and talking to us about terrain-influenced winds. It's been a great experience, Eric.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for the time.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Welcome back. Sea ice analysis. Radar barrow showing ice about 3 to 4 or 5 miles off the coast there, and pretty good northeast winds are going to pick up through here over the next couple of days. So that should begin to slide this stuff off to the southwest a little bit. And then as you go through Tuesday into Wednesday, they'll swing around to the north again and diminish. Going on to the marine forecast here, northwest 15 tomorrow for Clarence Strait to light south winds, Stevens Passage to about 20 knots northern Lynn Canal. Light winds here out along the coast at about 10 knots, mostly from the west, 7 to 8 foot seas. And then we got small craft advisories in the forecast here for Monday as that weakening front approaches with 25 knots, seas up to 13 feet in the north coast, lighter winds more southwesterly down to the south. Small craft advisories for Stevens Passage become gales for Lynn Canal, 35 knots out of the south, northern Lynn Canal with gusts to 50 knots in the forecast. And for Prince William Sound, tomorrow, east winds 20 knots, small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast here for southeast winds, gales, Barren Islands, Kodiak, on into Kamishak Bay, east at 40 knots, small craft advisory, southern Cook Inlet, lighter winds to the north. And then for Monday, those winds swing around to the south, south to southwest, 25 from northern Cook Inlet all the way down to Kamishak Bay. Same thing here, east side of Kodiak Island on up into the Barrens. And small craft advisories for south to southwest winds, 25 to 30-ish there for the North Gulf Coast. And it looks like Prince William Sound, strongest winds will be coming in tomorrow night and then coming back down to 20 knots on Monday. And for Bristol Bay, southeast 25, gales tomorrow's Sitkinak to Castle Cape, and then 15 to 25 knots southerlies there blowing across the peninsula. For Monday, things turn northwesterly to westerly, come down to 15 knots there with subsiding seas. Small craft advisories, at least to start with there for Bristol Bay, west winds at 25, southwest 25 here, Castle Cape to Sitkinak. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, east-southeast 15 to 20. Northerlies 20 increasing 30 to 35 knots here still across the central Aleutians, and then diminishing and becoming more variable, swinging around to the south late in the day there towards Chimney-in-Attu. And then we've got southeasterlies 30 knots, 12 to 13 foot seas here for the western Aleutians. Central areas, some gales, southeast 25 to 35 knots, becoming light and variable through here. North to northwest 15 to 20, mostly across to Unalaska Island. And for the southwest coast, here off the west of Kuskokwim Bay, southeast 25, northeast 25, only 15 for St. Lawrence Island. Northerlies 20 to 25 there, St. Matthew Island down to the Pribilofs. And then for Monday, north 20 for St. Lawrence Island, 20 to 25 knot winds from the northwest here. Again, strongest winds will be north of the island there. Lighter northwest breezes for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island. And on the eastern Arctic coast, westerlies pretty light, 10 knots or less. Northeast 15 here, central coast all the way down to Cape Thompson, and then even lighter toward the Bering Strait. And then those pick up significantly. We've got north to northeast here, 30 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas, small craft advisories until you reach the central coast, and then they come down to 20 knots out of the northeast all the way over to demarcation point. And for tonight, again, fair here over the central eastern interior. Rain, wind, gale warnings, rain heavy at times spreading up into the southwest interior, definitely Kodiak Island. Wet conditions continuing back out to the west. Nice evening and overnight period for the Panhandle. And then for tomorrow, look for a mostly sunny day there, but high wind watch out for East Anchorage and the Chugach Park, 79-mile-per-hour wind gusts possible late tomorrow afternoon through tomorrow night. Rain spreading eastward, maybe as far east as Yakutat by tomorrow evening. Rain back to the southwest coast here. More rain for the eastern Aleutians. Break through the north central interior, and just some remnants of some moisture up along the north slope areas. And then for Monday, rain.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
From her rich and fertile valleys to the shores of her icy seas, from her fields and farms and shellfish beds and her many nurseries, for the finest of her flavor, for the freshest by far, choose the things Alaskans bring to the market where you are. Products that we're proud to call our own, and it's all Alaska grown.
Alaska Public Media is pleased to present AK Passport, our new on-demand access portal for watching exclusive television programs. A members-only benefit, AK Passport offers an expanded